Hey, it's Noah Chestnut from The Athletic. If you're into games and sports, pay attention. I'm going to give you 4 sports terms. You tell me the common thread. Ready? Game, match, point, set. This one's kind of a gimme. The answer is how tennis is scored. Do you want more of a challenge? Check out Connections Sports Edition. It's a new daily game for sports fans. To play now, go to theathletic.com/connections.
The Athletic.
KTM is saved, probably, for now. Jorge Martin is hurt, again, worse than before, probably. This is the Race MotoGP Podcast coming into the MotoGP 2025 season opener in Thailand. I am Khorounzhiy, your host for today. Simon Patterson with me from Thailand with some questionable Wi-Fi, but seems to be working okay in the departments that matter. How's your energy level, Simon? Given the time of day is okay for me, but not so good for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of okay because I've been chilled the past few days ahead of absolutely dreading Buriram, where the weather forecast is saying it's going to be 40 degrees for the race.
Yeah, it looks brutal. Although I did go to the zoo recently and they had like a savanna type enclosure there, so I'm sure I can imagine what it feels like.
You're prepped for it.
Yeah,
obviously.
Absolutely.
We did. Do you remember we tested here? We tested in Buriram.
Yes.
Before the first race here that year at this time of the year, and it was just insanely hot then as well. So yeah, kind of expecting it to be a bit of a scorcher this weekend. Great fun.
Yeah, the one time I was to Buriram, it was primarily hot, but also obviously prone to raining at a moment's notice. It was kind of awesome. It was honestly very cool. Even though it left me with like my sole set of clothes completely soaked, just because I could not anticipate it starting to rain. Anyway, that's minor considerations compared to, say, a second bone-breaking injury to start the season before even a single race lap has taken place. But that's what's happened to Aprilia rider Jorge Martin. Simon, when I was away when the Martin news started breaking. So when the news came out, I was like, oh, a complication with his previous injury, I presume, means that he's going to miss Thailand. And then very quickly I realized, oh, that's the other hand. That's something else. So yeah. What is it? Something else exactly? What's happened?
Well, it sounds like because we're still not very sure of all the details, are we? It sounds like he's fallen off his super motorbike while training in Lleida, Marc Marquez's hometown, which is realistically one of the nearest tracks to where he lives in Andorra anyway. Mm-hmm. So that's why he was there, I'd imagine. I can only imagine from the fact that he's damaged hand and foot that he's high-sided himself, because you kind of have to do that to do both in one crash. Yeah. And he has managed to sustain a whole collection of fractures, basically. He's broken his left heel, which is not great, but it's not the end of the world and it didn't need surgery. He has a complex fracture of his left radius, which is the big bone in his wrist, which again is not awful, not greatest thing, but he's had 2 screws in it and that's fine. But by far the most complicated one is that he's also broken his left scaphoid, which is a really nasty bone to break because it has very low blood circulation. So it struggles to heal. They've put a screw in it, but I mean, whenever I hear broken scaphoid, it always worries me because that can potentially be... I mean, I know people who've done it and come back in 2 weeks, especially on a left wrist because it's not a throttle hand. Mm-hmm. I know people who've done it and it's taken 10 or 12 weeks. And I know a few riders who it's been a career ender for because of the nature of the injury. So at the minute, we don't know any timeline for when we're going to see Martin back. Because of this, we're kind of in a bit of a holding pattern. Aprilia are very good at keeping us up to date. They kind of brought us up to speed fairly quickly on the injuries, and they've given us a good update again today about the surgery that he's underwent to get those 3 screws installed. But we're going to be waiting and seeing, just like they are, to know when we're actually going to get to see the number 1 plate back on track.
Yeah, I think you can read into maybe at least a little bit into the fact that there's no even indication of an initial recovery timeline, because normally when an injury is seen as manageable or potentially giving you a chance to race pretty soon, they'll sort of make that pretty clear, and there's no such suggestion here. Spanish media, motorsport.com, the Spanish website, is reported they've heard that it might be 8 to 10 weeks, so over 2 months, which would write off basically the first quarter of the season for Martin. So it is much more serious by the sounds of it than even the initial injury he had that wrote off his preseason testing. There is a real possibility that Jorge Martin will be having his preseason testing effectively in April, May, while the rest of the field has already been racing their bikes and, doing all the sprints and all the practices and getting their setups honed over all those rounds. It's pretty ruinous to his aspirations of a high championship finish, I would say. But then again, it is a very long season. I don't know what was your first championship related emotion when hearing about the injury?
Honestly, we've spent quite a bit of time talking about how this year was going to be very unlikely for a title defense anyway.
Of course. Yeah.
And I have to admit that the news, as bad as it is, kind of hasn't really left me too concerned about what it's going to mean for his title hopes. I don't really think it changes too much, other than that it, we've already said this about his initial injury from the Sepang test. It kind of takes the pressure off a little bit, I think, because it means that he now has absolutely no expectations whatsoever from this season. He's never going to win the championship, never going to defend the number one plate. And you know what? It's okay, because you can say why, because of the injuries. So just spend the year working on that Aprilia, adapting yourself to it, learning how to make it work. Do all the stuff that riders hate doing, where you're testing new parts on a race weekend and working on making the bike better, and then come into next year as your big year, the year to challenge for another title.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, sitting in hospital, lying in hospital, you're not going to think, well, at least I've avoided a potentially embarrassing Q1 exit at Buriram. That's not going to be the priorities. But from a purely sporting standpoint, ignoring obviously the physical ramifications and the pain and the hopefully non-existent, but we never know, potential long-term consequences of the injury on Jorge Martin's career. I don't think this is competitively a disaster for Aprilia and for Jorge Martin specifically for that very same reason. I don't think they would have gone into the season thinking championship, and this, if anything, it just allows other people to catch up to that line of thinking. Yeah,
I mean, it's obviously very easy for me sitting here to say, no big deal, pressure's off for the year. He's not going to be feeling that way, and I don't mean to make light of how he is feeling by saying that. But it is kind of the reality of in the grand scheme of things, this probably makes what was going to be quite a tough season a little bit easier for him.
Yeah. All the best to Jorge, obviously, in his recovery. And it's still, I mean, it doesn't change the championship outlook, but it does suck that we won't get to see him get to start on an equal footing and get a good feel for what he can do with the Aprilia right away. And as we know with Franco Morbidelli last year, when you have such a situation to start the season, there's the asterisk remains until the final round. It's basically there through to next season. But hopefully, hopefully Jorge Martin comes in and he's good enough to where there's no need for any asterisk. Historically, I've seen there were 2 reigning champions in the Premier Class history, or at least 2 that I've seen, that weren't at the season opener. And they were Kenny Roberts in 1979 and Freddie Spencer, the no longer chief steward, but was before this season, in 1984. Spencer was there at the season opener, but he got injured in practice before he could race. Roberts had a testing crash, and also 1987 is apparently the most insane season of anything that's ever happened. Just reading up on it, it's completely bananas. Maybe we should do something about that at some point, because wow, genuinely. But I only bring it up to say that has absolutely no relevance on modern MotoGP or modern motorcycle racing.
It's been a long time, isn't it? I had to, in my head it had happened much more sooner than that, but no, it hasn't.
Yeah, I was thinking Rossi will have done it, but no, no. I was
Rossi
thinking,
never really injured himself, did he?
Well, he had the 2010 injury that wrote off, that season, the Jorge Lorenzo title battle, and I thought that might have happened earlier than it did, but no, he did 3 races before.
Actually, the earliest the closest that we've probably come to it that I can think of in recent years is 2014. Marquez broke a leg, flat tracking coming into the start of the season, but still made it to the start of the season and then won the first 10 races.
Yeah. And I guess we can say 2020 Mark. If I brought up the Rossi 2010 thing, then 2020 Mark also.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also, he started the race, eh?
Yeah, started. And what a race it was. Until it wasn't, unfortunately. In the meantime, Aprilia is fielding Lorenzo Savadori, who's much busier than he expected, poor guy. He's fielding him in Thailand, and I presume it's going to field him in the coming rounds if the recovery does take as long as possible. The great thing for Aprilia is that Marco Bezzecchi looks fit and firing. And
Savadori came to Buriram to test.
Yeah.
So he's not at the massive disadvantage he would normally be at. He's just at a considerable disadvantage.
He's at a massive disadvantage in the sense that he planned to chill, I presume.
Well, yes. Yeah, very much so. The first question he gets asked on Thursday will be, were you intending to be here?
Yeah, remember the 2020 Stefan Bradl experience of, I'm still here. This isn't really, this wasn't really the idea. But I gotta be here every other weekend, and it's also particularly it's clearly not a job that's very enjoyable in race weekend, because obviously they're there to race, but manufacturers will use these opportunities to just put them through the ringer in terms of testing parts, and it means that they don't maximize their weekends, which for some of them means their stock can often take a bit of a hit because you're not as competitive as you were going to be, so people sort of write you off. I don't think Laurie has that problem really. He doesn't have massive MotoGP grid aspirations as far as I know. But it's just going to be an extended test for Aprilia.
Yeah.
But it is good that, it does lessen the pain, not the physical pain for Jorge Martin, unfortunately, but the pain that Marco Bezzecchi has had such a good preseason, doesn't it?
I don't know if that makes it easier or better.
For Aprilia or for
Aprilia, Aprilia it makes it better. For Martin,
for sure.
might not be quite the news he wanted to see. But you would imagine that this is not going to be this is not the start of the season that Aprilia expected, but it's not going to be a particularly bad start to the season if some of what we've seen from Bezzecchi so far comes true.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it doesn't, then there's still the point that we're waiting for our other guy, we're waiting for our number one, we're waiting for our champion, and let's see what he brings when he's fit and fighting. On Patreon, we're not yet revisiting that 1979 season. Maybe that's in the future, although I'm not sure I'm going to get anybody to sign off on that in any meaningful way, but we are doing the 2015 Revisited series among many other things. We did a Moto3, Moto2 preview podcast, myself and Simon, that seemed to go down quite well, although maybe people are just being nice. But in any case, if you haven't signed up for that, and that sounds like it could be your cup of tea, we are currently running a 90% off your first week promo. So if you wanted to check it out now would be the time. If you don't know hard feelings, I guess. I don't think that's part of the promo. They might cut that. But if they don't cut that, fair enough. Matt is so much more natural at these than I am. In any case. The other big news from these past couple of days, it was February 25th. It is still February 25th as we record this. Spoilers. I don't know if this comes out on February 26th. I probably shouldn't date it like this. Again, I'm not doing anything right. But the vote, the creditor vote, has taken place in Upper Austria in what they sometimes call Inkreis and at other times in Viertel or something like that, out of not necessary detail. In any case, the KTM creditor vote has taken place and the restructuring plans have been approved. We don't yet know what this means for the KTM motorsport programs and the MotoGP program specifically, which is the prism through which we are viewing this, as this is the Race MotoGP podcast. But at the very least, it sounds that the brand name will be in place. It will not have to be taken over. It just needs to find a considerable amount of investment. Simon, do you remember the figures quite? I think it's something like 800 million across, covering the 30% repayment quota and restarting the production.
So it's about 750 million, of which 150 is split off for the costs of restarting production, which have obviously been paused since late November, I think, since they've built a motorbike because of various factors, including the massive backlog of bikes that they had already built and the fact that they couldn't pay any suppliers to order material. So they've been stopped. It's going to cost 150 million, which is wild, just to restart production again. And it seems like that money is going to come out of Stefan Pierer, former CEO's own pocket, because, I mean, he's been doing what all incredibly wealthy CEOs do and still taking quite nice dividends the whole way through the process of the company going bankrupt. So he's having to put his hand in his pocket. The other 600 million is basically 30% of what they owe. The majority, basically what the vote today was getting the people that they owe money to agree that they're only going to get 30% of their money back, which is that 600 million figure. Of that, they've got already, we think, about 150 million from Indian manufacturer Bajaj, who obviously have a massive financial incentive to do so because they own 49% of KTM. You'd imagine that percentage will increase a little bit. With that sort of investment, they'll take quite a big chunk of what Pierer owns, which is the other 51 essentially. And then they're trying to find the rest of the money, the other 450 million from other places. We think Pierer is probably going to add a little bit of his own money in there as well, another 50 million maybe from what we've heard. Plus, then it seems like there's a big investment group being led by American bank Citibank to try and find the rest of the money. They think that they have financial partners ready to come in and bring that cash, pay off some of what is owed so that production can restart and we can see them building some motorbikes again.
Yeah, certainly the tone of discussion around the process suggests that KTM is confident of finding the requisite money over the next quarter to make sure that the terms agreed today will be adhered to.
Yeah, you should say they have until the 23rd of May to find the 600 million. So they've got plenty of time.
Yeah, and
in the grand scheme of things.
There was a report in the lead up to the creditor meeting, specifically like the day before, from Austrian tabloid Österreich, which is Austria in German. So it's a language
German,
lesson.
Austrian and Austrian is the same thing.
Well, I don't think so. And I think there's a lot of people who would dispute that, including Austrians and Germans. I don't have enough experience with the two of them yet.
I speak Irish English and I don't get funny about it, so I'm just going to let it go and
I wish somebody told me what type of English I speak, because I think it varies from.
Technically, it's Hiberno English I speak.
Hiberno English.
Yeah, because I'm from the north of Ireland. It's Ulster Scots influenced, so it's kind of.
I know that Hibernian is a Scottish football team. Yeah. That's all I got. I presume that's related in some way.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Fantastic. See, I'm very, very knowledgeable.
So Hibernia is actually the Latin name for Ireland. So I don't know how it's become associated with Scotland so much, but
this is one of those things that it isn't going to get cut, and a lot of listeners are going to be like, "Well, this could be cut. You could absolutely cut this very, very easily, very simply." Going back to KTM, there was a report on Österreich, the tabloid, or specifically its online edition, OE24. I don't know, it might have been in the paper, Österreich too. I don't have a copy at hand. But basically that BMW was touted as a potential investor/buyer for the KTM enterprise. And the way it read was that would be, because of how the report is written, and it was like that would be not just the continuation of KTM, but KTM being completely subsumed by the BMW brand, or the tone of the reporting was quite that this is a bad outcome for KTM, and not to mention, of course, it would be a bad outcome for Austria, because the suggestion was then that BMW would move production out of Austria. The more you read that, the more you're like, this does feel quite tied into the vote and the vote outcome, and trying to drum up a specific vote outcome. But I should also say, apparently they reached out for comment from BMW and got no comment, which I don't know how willing BMW would be to be used in any sort of vote-related procedure if there wasn't at least something going on in that regard. Because wouldn't you then just go, no, we're not involved in any way? What are you talking about?
I mean, yes and no, because sometimes no comment does literally just mean no comment. It literally means we don't want to be involved in this. It's also possible that if they were aware of like potential shenanigans with today's vote, that they deemed that the best thing to say was to say nothing rather than to potentially slight someone or get involved in it or seem to be interfering or anything like that. Honestly, with my deeply cynical approach to all these things, think that someone just made this up.
Right.
Whether they did it for some sort of a political sway in today's vote, because let's be honest, so we should say, backtrack a little bit because we haven't explained this. There was two groups today in the vote to decide whether or not we should accept they should accept the restructuring plan of KTM. One was a group of creditors who wanted this to go ahead and wanted the restructure and were happy to take 30%. The other were a largely Austrian group who were deeply unhappy about it and wanted a different outcome. And if you wanted to scare a group of Austrians into supporting a plan that they weren't entirely on board with, then saying, oh, I know, we'll just shut the whole thing down and sell it to the Germans would probably be quite a good way to do it. So maybe that was the reason, and maybe I'm just looking for conspiracy theories, but either way, I don't think this was ever a credible option, because all you have to do is look at BMW's own finances, which at the minute are not great, because of a series of complicated factors, including trying to build electric cars when no one wants electric cars yet, and a sales slump in China, and all sorts of things that have left them for really like the last year or so not in a great place as a whole either. So for me, it was always an unrealistic opportunity or offer, and it may or may not have just been a fear tactic.
Look, ultimately, none of this stops me from envisioning BMW KTM 2027 MotoGP entry in some capacity, presumably spearheaded by Toprak Razgatlioglu, because whenever you talk BMW in a motorsport capacity these days, you talk about Toprak and his suddenly very vocal unhappiness with World Superbike, which, now that I've brought up, let's take a little bit of a detour. World Superbike opener this past weekend. I guess pause this if you want to avoid spoilers, but I like if you were planning to catch up on it and still haven't, you have a very interesting.
No, we don't do spoilers here.
Yeah, it is a MotoGP
news, Val. There's no spoilers in real life.
It is a MotoGP podcast. I mean, if I'm listening,
I was on a beach in Thailand and I caught up with it, so you know what I mean. Toprak deeply unhappy that he left the first three races with only 20 points. Despite the fact that last year he left the first three races with only 18 points and then still went on to win 13 races and the championship comfortably despite missing 2 whole rounds. Again, people are saying things loudly to apply political pressure because BMW have taken away, or the rules have taken away his basically MotoGP spec chassis that he had all of last season, which is why he won 13 races in a row on a bike that absolutely was not a superbike anymore. They've taken that away because he won 13 races in a row in the championship with 2 races to spare. He's lost his concession status. Suddenly he's riding a bike that doesn't work as well as the one that he had last year. And he's quite vocal about it because he knows that if he has 3 mediocre rounds to start the season, he will then get his concessions back. But because the World Superbike concession rules are... I'm trying to find the polite way to say the most cryptic, confusing. It's like Christmas tree lights in November. It's just a tangled web of nonsense that no one can comprehend, including lots of the teams. So no one really knows how it works. No one really knows what concessions anyone has. All they know is that there might be a chance that BMW get theirs back if they're a bit crap and tell everyone very loudly that they are. So that's Toprak's game. And he said that he was so unhappy with being the only Ducati or the only BMW in a top 6 full of Ducatis that he was going to quit and go off and do something else, presumably like MotoGP, where he'd have the opportunity to be the top KTM or Yamaha, presumably, in a group of 6 Ducatis at the top of the championship standings, because that's exactly what MotoGP is. In fact, it's worse than Superbikes because we were at Phillip Island, a track that traditionally favours the Ducati Panigale. It's just moaning for the sake of moaning. It's political.
Yeah, this Toprak round did genuinely look a whole lot like last year's Phillip Island Toprak round, adding the third race mechanical failure that was basically
should say, like,
copy-paste.
race 2 was compromised by his own mistake and race 3 by a mechanical failure. It's not like he had it's not like he was just completely outclassed all weekend by the other bikes.
Nicola Bolliga very comfortably won 3 races for Ducati, the former VR46 protege. Other Ducatis did look quite good. So I'd say if I was non-Toprak, if I was the other World Superbike manufacturers, I'd be worried, because it does look like the satellite Ducatis there are better than it used to be. It does look more like MotoGP than it used to last season, which is just funny. Let's go back to KTM. Let's go back to MotoGP. We have not really heard anything motorsport related come out of this process for a little while. It doesn't feel like you can't be sure without being in the building, but either it's not being brought up, or it might not even meaningfully come up when it comes to the self-administrator and self-administration and the people running the process. But it's got to be good news for the motorsport program, right? Because
no news is good news, right?
Yes. And it's the same people staying in charge effectively, or overseeing effectively, obviously with being beholden to investors, but it's the same people overseeing who have already by proxy told us that no, we want to continue with all of this, and all of this includes MotoGP, and MotoGP includes MotoGP in 2027.
Yeah, we would have something to be concerned about if they'd said, oh, and by the way, we're sacking this person, and this person who run the motorsport program. We got no news about it today. No news is good news. There has been no fundamental shift. There has been no, we shortly after the meeting concluded, and we kind of got a whisper of what was coming. We got the media schedule for the Thai Grand Prix this weekend from the KTM press officer, which, considering they didn't do media at all at the Bury Ram test ahead of this meeting, is promising. We've got to presume that there will be something whispered out this weekend that kind of quietly says, this program is going to continue now that we're in a better position, etc., etc. There will be a quiet word where if Pit Buyer is there, he will be interviewed by Service TV, who broadcast the championship in Austria and are owned by Red Bull. Something like that will come out to just kind of smooth the waters, make it clear that there's a bit of a future for this, because otherwise the riders are going to get pestered about it, at least on Thursday.
Yeah, and that is good. It is obviously good for MotoGP, because you just don't want to go down to 4 manufacturers. You can live with it, but you'd really rather not. And there are a lot of reasons to have question marks about your ability to attract a new manufacturer for the new rules cycle, not because something's wrong with the championship, just because it's difficult to attract a new manufacturer. It's impossible to count on a new manufacturer coming in, really. You have to, your championship has to be in phenomenal health to be able to ensure that. And I know, Simon, you've heard some stuff about potential new manufacturer candidates, but I think before that gets to any sort of confidence level, I imagine they're still a ways away. And before that, you want to ensure that everybody who's at the table right now continues.
Yeah, absolutely. There's whispers about things going on, but nothing set in stone right now. And it's going to be, everything is being set now for the new rules cycle. No one is going to come in ahead of that, because why would you?
Well, let's very quickly preview Thailand then, because this is coming out ahead of Thailand. We've already touched upon the fact that it will be hot and warm and humid, but what outcome do we expect? Simon, what outcome do you expect out of the sprint and out of the main race? And please, this is a very difficult question, I imagine, because you definitely did not say it before on a previous podcast episode.
Well, I'm not saying that other people see it in a similar way to me, but the only 2 riders in any press conference on Thursday are Marc Marquez and Pecco Bagnaia, which is kind of indicative of who everyone is expecting to be fighting for first and second Saturday and Sunday. I don't know if I was going to put money on it right now. Probably Marquez for the sprint, Bagnaia for Sunday, simply because they both looked really strong in testing. They're both super fast, but I think maybe Marquez still isn't quite up to speed on a bike that's a bit different from what he had last year. Whereas Bagnaia is doing another year in the same machine that he dominated on last year in terms of race wins. So If I was to hazard a guess, that would be it. But I mean, it's hard to see anyone else, isn't it?
As someone brought up in our Patreon chat, and does seem to be correct, no Samkhya Chantra press conference is there? Because that's probably
No,
slightly curious.
Yeah, I mean, why grow the sport in new markets whenever you can just double down on the Spanish and the Italians, eh?
Which, by the way, I am conscious of the fact this might be like the first time we've brought up Samkhya Chantra this off-season, so just for posterity's sake, I think he's had a pretty decent post-season. The lap time progression has been there.
He absolutely has.
So, I mean, the Honda is not really the bike to do much of anything important on right now, and we don't know if he'll ever be a rider who can do much of anything super important in MotoGP, but very, very reasonable, very sensible start. He does not look out of place, and sort of if you transpose the gaps across manufacturers, he kind of looks reasonably there or thereabout with Fermin Aldeguer and Aigura, the two other rookies.
He's not a million miles away from Takanakigami level performances. It's not going to be embarrassing.
It's very good for him, but again, no surprise because you're if you win in Moto2, you're not a scrub.
Exactly,
that much is obvious.
Exactly.
Well, let's see who's going to be not a scrub this upcoming weekend in Thailand. I would say it's all of them because none of them are scrubs. I don't want no scrubs in MotoGP. But we'll Simon is very unhappy with my outro. It's fair enough because I came up with it in my head 30 seconds ago and it is absolutely terrible. Let's hope the race weekend is not terrible. It's another great segue. See you then with an actual normal host who knows what he's saying. Goodbye.
The Athletic.